Okay. So, welcome to another episode of Opinionate. Today we have our guest Max here. He's a rising sophomore at Duke University, I think.
You're right.
Uh yes, and he has interest in freedom and moral, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't really call it I wouldn't really phrase it as morality because it's kind of ambiguous and hard to find term. I'll more say about free will, the relationship between free will and responsibilities. More like how I would put it. Yeah.
Cool. So let's start off by talking about our understanding of free will, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, free will, it's to define it, it's quite simple. It's whenever you're able to choose alternatively that let's say you're given a scenario where there are two where Lisa gets an offer from both Harvard to study law or from UCLA, let's say, to study movie, then she's able to choose either one. That she's able to accept both offers. She has the ability to accept either offers. I would say that's quite a definition of free will. As how I will define it,
I think based
to
on that
not complicate
definition,
anything. So yeah, it's that you're being able to choose.
based on that definition, I'm going to guess that you're a incompatibilist. That you think that free will is incompatible with
Yeah.
determinism. Yeah, please
Um,
continue.
Yes, for sure. I think it's quite influenced by of a professor at Duke actually that if he's quite famous in the realm of free will and determinism. His name is Peter Van Wagen, who's quite
Oh,
a modern figure to study this.
yeah.
And yeah, he does have upper division class at Duke, but then so if you read his essay on free will, then you can see how he maps out how determinism and free will can be incompatible by definition. That's quite my stance as well in this matter. So whenever I think later on that I'll use terms like determinism, it implies a lack of free will.
I see. And based on your study of Van Wagen, I would assume that you take a more analytic approach. So I think one question would be like, have you also considered perhaps more continental approaches like Heidegger or Sartre, or do you do approaches like purely analytically?
Um, yeah, no, definitely some continental approach to it too. I don't think I definitely do not limit myself to just that one approaches. I think Heidegger's work, and I think I do believe that at least the idea of Dasein is quite related in some sense to this discussion. So then yeah, I will not say that I'm limiting myself to only analytical approaches to this.
I see. I mean, as much as I know not that much about Peter Van Wagen, but would you like to talk about the consequence argument? For instance, uh, I think that's kind of like what he's known for
Uh,
in discussion.
yeah,
Uh,
he does have that. I think it's quite a complicated. He has like he lists out many
mhm.
examples. It's quite a game of language, and there are many. Even if we have to, it would never be enough in like 45 minutes or 40 minutes to
Yeah.
to really explicate his ideas because it has like it has different branches of determinism as well, and also in the idea of
Mhm.
freedom, there's also a negative freedom and a positive freedom to it, and so yeah, so I think it's quite. I wouldn't approach it in that way. I think in terms of consequences, I'll think more of like I said, I'll prefer the term of responsibility when we're talking about
Mhm.
this. Um,
right?
For him, by definition, determinism means given a certain past and a present, there's only one. Given the law of the nature of the history, there's only one unique future. So if you go back anytime in the present or anytime in the past, then the present you're in only will lead to one definite and only one possible future. So I think to him that's the thesis of determinism. And to be put the most simply, and then I think because I see people use terms like moral responsibility or moral consequences, or because I think it can be misleading in a sense, because it's hard to distinguish that and let's say legal responsibility and other kinds of I think when you put it into the discussion of free will, whether it's a moral responsibility or a legal responsibility really doesn't matter. So it's more of as long as you have to be responsible for your actions in some sense, then that's the only part that's meaningful in terms of this discussion. Then I do think that so I think that's how I'll phrase it, and I think most simply that's how like most people see it, to not really complicate anything here. So yeah.
So what exactly is moral responsibility?
Like I said, I think moral responsibility it can be quite confusing, right? People talk about morality in different sense, and what's moral and what's immoral. It definitely departs from what we like just simply legal responsibility. It doesn't have it's hard to find an objective standard to it, right? It's hard to I think even like morality was talked like in many known sense that it was talked in Confucianism. It was talked in old Greek philosophies, but then I think quite famously in Confucianism, they took the path of when you see morality, it's more of you cannot really define it, and it's hard to really see objectively. So then Confucius took the idea of examples, that when you see someone, it's kind of exemplarism approach, that when you see someone and if he's doing something moral, you can just tell, you can feel it, you can see it. So then there's nothing else to be said, and you just have to follow his example and follow his lead. So then that's a Confucius take on this. I used to compare it to like with Wittgensteinian approach to how we see the world, as just to look, not to say anything. So I think that's how a lot of people right now terms to approach morality. It's hard to give objective standard, so I would not quite to use that. I think in the discussion of free will and determinism, it's meaningless to define what morality is. It's more meaningful to talk about to just simply talk about whether we're responsible for our actions or not. How to explain us, because I think Peter Van Wagen took the approach of, he first argues that free will is incompatible with determinism, but then I think he sides more with the free will party. He believes that people possess true free will, and not that everything's determined, that certain past doesn't lead to a unique future. There can be multiple futures and multiple possibilities. So I think that's his stance, but then also that's the part that I kind of disagree with him, that I do take a deterministic approach, and I don't think and I'm also a compatibilist in terms of how determinism can coexist with our responsibility, our paying responsibility to the world in some sense. That's kind of my argument and what I'm working on currently. So yeah.
Interesting.
That's
so
interesting.
You think that
can you talk about
there's
go ahead.
okay,
go on.
so you think that like free will is incompatible with determinism, but that or society in general is compatible with determinism, right?
Yes.
But like I think too that's kind of counterintuitive, at least on the face of it. And I would really like
Yeah, definitely.
enjoy if you can give me like your understanding of responsibility and how that is compatible with determinism. Because as far as I can see, why should I hold someone responsible if his or her actions aren't even like performed freely?
Hmm.
You know, if they're, for instance, if they're just manipulated by others
Yes.
or manipulated by nature, why should I hold that person responsible?
Yes, yes, definitely. I think for me, I approach it. I understand it's quite counterintuitive. It's just as counterintuitive to argue that everything's determined, that we do not. There's a lack of free will. I'm telling you, there's a lack of free will. It's quite counterintuitive, as well, because people can just argue that, oh, see, I can raise my right hand, and if I want to raise my left hand, I can raise my left hand, right? I seem to possess free will. It's always quite counterintuitive to even. So let's just set that as a premise. That let's
Okay.
say we do not have free will, because that's another argument itself. So let's say we just have we do not there's a lack of free will, and I approach it with a quite I think was kind of Leibnizian. The time where it's when people were talking about the principle of sufficient reason. So I do think I do approach it with like a causality approach. I do think that so okay, so let's put it this way. When we talk about the compatibilism between lack of free will and paying responsibility to our actions, I think there are two layers of truth to be paying attention to at the same time. And so they're both like macro perspectively and micro. That's how I phrased it. That there's another truth. So the layer of truth that's we lost him.
Yeah. Let's wait for like probably a minute or two.
Yeah, definitely.
So do you just like get to pick the course like by whoever professor you want at Duke, or like is it difficult to do that?
So I think well, Peter Van his course is quite upper division. So it's for mostly for masters, whoever approaching a graduate degree, a master degree, for graduate students. And then I think undergrads it's difficult unless you're at least a junior or senior. But then for most of the philosophy classes, I'll say it's never it's it's not like other subjects when you always run into courses like let's say econ. There always some kind of overload, and then where well people just cannot, like there are like 50, 60 people on the wait list for one class. But then uh, I'll say that's never a problem for philosophy courses. It's small. It's usually just like 20, 30 people at most. But then most of the discussions are just 9 to 10 people. But then it's quite easy to join, to be honest. It's not that difficult to pick. But there are also requirements to be fulfilled. Some more difficult classes you need approval from the professors or some kind of upper division approvals. I think to graduate you only need like some logic courses and some metaphysics courses, and then some, I think, yeah, some. That's it. It's you only need like 9 to 10 cores, so that's like to get a major in philosophy. So that's not as difficult, but you do need, I think for philosophy department, you do need a dissertation for to graduate, which is an essay that's about like 50, 60 pages long before you graduate. And then that's not required by most of the other departments, let's say econ or sociology, but then philosophy does have that option. So yeah.
Well, all right. Kevin is back, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
let's keep going.
Oh yeah, where was I? Oh yeah, I was I do think there are two layers of truth that can be respected simultaneously. That the idea that everything's determined, it's more of, I would say, a more macro perspective truth, that it's like we know, let's say it's just as counterintuitive when we say, oh, like everything's determined, we do not have free will. At the same time, we do think we're self-conscious, right? We do think we're self-conscious and we're conscious about our decisions and we can determine it. It's more of like an illusion, and telling you that you do not have free will would not really let's say we just put it out there blatantly, telling everyone in the world that we're lacking free will. It's not going to cause any. It's not going to cause any. It might be causing chaos shortly, but then in the long run, people will just be doing whatever they're doing. There might be people who are saying that, oh, then I'll then why would I try? Like why don't I just give up on my life, right? But then if I can't even determine anything, but then that thought is kind of determined as well. So in that sense, um a lot of people are like it's difficult to really just give up on yourself. In some sense, like there's a more of micro perspective truth that you have to respect at the same time, because we're living in the reality. We're living in a world of details of like things that's not more of like a higher level, that those thoughts, it's not going to affect your daily actions and like whatever your need to go to work and get food and all that, and make money and all that. It's still knowing that you don't have free will. Like maybe you quit your job for a week, and then you'll realize that, oh no, I can't continue doing this, and just get back to working anyway. So then I think it's not really going to, even breaking that truth to anyone, it's not going to really change anything. People will just keep on doing what they're doing, and then believing in that illusion. I used to make this analogy that it's more like watching a recording soccer game. It's a recording game, but then if you don't know the result, because that's what we're living in, we don't know what's going to happen. We know that it's determined, but we don't know what it is. So then it's like watching a recording soccer game. If we don't know the result and we just put it up there on the top right corner, it's live, even though it's not. It's recorded. It happened yesterday. We'll still watch it as if it's live, and then we'll still enjoy it as if it's live. Because we don't know the result, and we had this illusion that it's live. So then I think it's quite an analogy to how we are living this life as well, that it's a recorded life, that everything's determined, but since we do not know what's going on, what's the result, we have the illusion that we have control for anything. We're living in this present, and we don't know what's going. We do not have all the facts or how all the causes to deduce the fact, to know what's the only possible future will become. So then, since it's never possible for us to gather all the facts and all the sufficient reasons that will lead to a determined future, so then we'll still live our life as if it's a live soccer game. So then that's more of my approach to how like we should build this. It's quite counterintuitive, but then soon as we get that, it becomes more intuitive to know that why we still need to pay responsibility to whichever our actions is doing, because it's more of a more micro truth that we have to respect, that to survive, it's more of a human instinct, that it can be separated. Then to survive or to do whatever, we still need to have laws, we still need to have standards, we still need to have morality, even though it's some kind of subjective morality that we have to respect and follow. And then following that, we do need to still pay responsibility to our actions, so that there are consequences, so that we can at least limit the adverse factors that's damaging the survival of whatever the society or yourself or the human species. But then praising or complimenting, reinforcing on the positive factors that's pushing it. That's, I think, why we're paying responsibility to our actions for, and that's not contradictory to the idea of the lack of free will. But there is something that's the lack of free will. It's not going to determine what like our responsibility is going to be, but it can determine how we see it. So then I think that's another part of my argument, that given that there's determinism, it's not we should not, just because it's everything determined, that we stop punishing someone, we stop letting anyone pay responsibility for their action, but we should start viewing those who are punished right now differently. So we should separate, to put it more simply, we should separate the sins and the sinners. So I think or the actions and the people who's doing it, who's committing it. So I think it's a very key differentiation that we should make when we're acknowledging the truth of determinism, that we should acknowledge that um, even though we're making people to pay responsibility for their actions, we should at the same time respect the truth that they're innocent, right? Like we're letting them pay responsible for their actions, not because we hate them or that they're just guilty or they're sinners. In any sense, they're not. They're still innocent, but they're just paying it because they have to, right? Because they have to, because the society has to go on. Everything has to go on. They have to. It's just quite an argument to that it's like once understanding that you take different approaches to death penalty to all different legal problems as well, and so I think we should have emotions of sympathy to sinners or to criminals, acknowledging that there's free will. It doesn't contradict to the fact that we're punishing them, because we're really not punishing the person, we're punishing their actions to keep their actions from keep happening. But then since it's impossible to separate them in real life, like we have to punish them at the same time somehow. But then emotionally we should feel sympathetic and acknowledging that they're still innocent people. I think that's like this thesis will lead to eventually, this thesis that their determinism are compatible with, or lack of free will are compatible with the idea that we're responsible for actions. But then at the same time, we should emotionally support or be sympathetic to criminals, to those. Even I had this extreme stance that if determinism is true, even someone who killed my parents should be they should go to prison for it, but I should not hate them because they're still innocent people, right? That's will sort of what this thesis will lead to, I think. And I think if we observe the different societies and different cultures, I think that's what historically it's been leading to. Let's say if we watch the past of death penalty and the severity of punishment,
Henry, can
how
you
cruel.
can you mute yourself? Henry, you should.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's all right.
It's-
Yeah.
Please continue.
I think if we, yeah, if we see how history has been developing that or progressing forward, the punishment that we are treating criminals has been less severe and less severe. So that I think that's kind of a sign that we're being, because if we can just do, let's say, life imprisonment, according to my thesis, that we should not do death penalty, right? Because it achieves the same purpose of keeping their actions from keep damaging the society, but then it's more humane in terms of treating the criminal, of because we have to at the same time pay them sympathetical emotions. So I think that's what kind of the society is progressing in a way as well. That's kind of aligning with these theses. So
Okay.
yeah,
I'm sorry to like interrupt you, but I think you raised a lot of good points, and
absolutely.
I'd love to read your entire paper. But I think we can just like have a discussion on some of the points you raised before moving on to
Absolutely.
the practical issues. So about the theoretical issues, I'd like to like act as a devil's advocate here and question the idea that that a person should not be indifferent, given that they have no free will, because I think that they should be indifferent. Um, and your argument that they should not be, because otherwise, how could society function? I do not think that's a cogent argument, because it makes no sense to talk about how society could be otherwise. If society fails, then the failure of society is of necessity. It doesn't make sense to talk about the world that would be better if you were to act this way. So it seems like your argument is based on the premise that if we were to act as if we're responsible, then the world would be a better place. But I just reject that premise on the ground that the world cannot be otherwise, and that if I do not go to work, there's no way you can convince me to go to work, because any argument of yours must assume that I could have had an alternative at some point. But again, that assumption is not given by determinism. So I'm curious, how would you answer that?
I think it's quite a common error that when we're, or a common like field that we run into, because we think about it counterintuitively. The like I argue, the first day of truth more, I think it should not be entangled. It should not be talked about. It should not be. You should not use the first day of truth to argue against the second layer of truth, if that makes sense. It's in a sense that the reality, because let's say, I think it's quite common that as people grow up, they feel more helpless, that they feel that they have less options, right? They have less
Mm-hmm.
options in their life of what they can do, what they cannot do. Christianity will put that in a sense that we do have free will, but then it's kind of a limited free will. There's still things that we can freely will to raise our right hand, but we cannot will to fly or to just jump 10 meters high. But then that's a Christianity argument. But then I think to that sense, it's also that we do not know all the sufficient reason that's leading to your action of raising your right hand. It's that, or the idea of you. A lot of people think that they can. For example, a lot of people think that they can choose what they want to eat, right? It's like, I want to eat this for lunch, but then
I think we're talking past each other a bit. Like, I agree with you, like, on the point that we have no free will. I take that as the premise of our discussion today. But I
okay,
simply don't understand why, given that we have no free will, why we should still care about things. And you talked about this thing called a micro truth, but what does that mean? Like, determinism is as true for microphysics as it is true for everyday objects, like this pillow. If determinism is true, and that doesn't seem to me to be a fact that's limited to physicists. That seems to be a fact of everyday life. So I didn't really understand the concept of micro truth. I think it's just truth
um,
simpliciter.
yes, yeah, it's to me, I put it in the paper as the idea of this, when the society is progressing forward, there's still the idea
Hmm.
of it's kind of a social way to put Darwinism in a sense of survival of the fittest, that we still need to eliminate adverse factors and um, support positive factors. But in that sense, that in reality, when you say that there is determinism and where there's a lack of free will,
Right.
if I just break the news to anyone, it's not going to. We do think that you have the choice to give up on your life. You have the choice to believe in that, and then suicide, right? You have the
I
choice
don't
to
have a
believe in that.
choice. I don't in
You
fact
think
have a
you
choice.
seem that you have the choice, right? Like people
But
think
I
that they
don't
have the
in
choice, but
fact.
yes, like
Yeah,
you said, you
but they
don't in fact have the
shouldn't.
choice. Yeah, they
But they
shouldn't,
shouldn't think
and
that they have. Yeah. And I guess that
they
what's at
shouldn't.
stake here is not what they in fact do. What's at stake here is what they should do. Um,
Yeah, what
uh,
I think, because in that sense, talking about like right when we're talking about what we should do, it's also
right.
when we're talking about what we should do, it's a more responsibility. It's more like a morality argument, right? It's the idea of like you should do this, but if given determinism is true, it seems that it's even counterintuitive to tell anyone what they should do, right? Because they don't even have the choice
Exactly.
to do
And I
anything.
think
So
that is the case.
So yeah, I but the fact is that since we don't know what's that unique future will lead to, you're still living that illusion of you having free will, right? You're still living that intuitive fact that you're giving yourself that you're having free will. It's just as how counterintuitive a lack of free will can be to you. If we accept that premise, it's more like automatically you accept the fact that um
Mhm.
everything of this is an illusion, but it's not an illusion you can escape, right? It's an illusion that you have to live into because you just do not have all the facts, facts from the past that can tell
Uh,
you what that definite future will lead you to. If that's the case, let's say
right.
if you can know what's that unique future is going to be, then it's more of a problem that it's impossible in a sense because we do not understand how our self-consciousness functions as well because um it's similar to how your actions of how you think you can say the thing
Mhm.
that you're saying right now, but it's just all an illusion. It might be caused by the dream you had last night, all the different how the air molecules move in the air, all different things add up together leading to that definite future, but the facts are immaculate to calculate, and it's impossible for a creature that's guided by the free will. Let's say it's more of taking idea of the Dasein in the sense that me and the world is which should be understood as the same thing. Right? It's we're living in the world. It's to me it's a sense that it's all materialistic in the sense that we do not it's just we're a more complicated machine, a complicated machine that had this illusion that we do have free will. But then given that given that it doesn't forbidden us to knowing that it doesn't allow us to escape this illusion in a sense. So that's why we're still living in this. And as long as you don't
But
have all the facts, then there's never there always going to be arguments of what should happen, right? There's always going to be arguments of, oh, I should do this next, because you don't know what that unique future is going to be. So then you just have to still live in this illusion and telling and keep doing what you're doing, just as if you have free will.
right, but perhaps in fact I will live as if I have free will. Perhaps that's in fact what will happen. But what I'm saying here is that it makes no sense to talk about the as if it is what should happen, as if I should live as if there's no free will. It seems to me it doesn't make sense to talk about it this way. And when it comes to illusion,
Yeah,
first of all, like my personal opinion is I agree with you that I have no free will, then I'm determined. But I go a step further and I say, given that's the case, knowing that it is an illusion, like I just don't care about things. There's how would you
yeah, it's
convince someone like me to start caring? Because I don't think there's any rational argument you can give it to me to the effect that I should
I
start caring. Perhaps you can say that I'll in fact care, to which I say you're right, I will in fact care, but there's no argument you can give to the effect that I should care or that there's something good about me caring.
There's not. Yeah, that's true. There's not even an argument that I can give to myself that I should care about a lot of things. But it turns
Right.
out that since I cannot escape this illusion, I will still care. I will still care. Like it's not like I'm telling myself,
Okay.
oh, I don't care about this. But then it's more like, let's say, in a way that put it. I always think that it's hard to really be to really act like you don't care about anything, right? It's really hard. It's really difficult to because we wake up, we look in the
Hmm.
mirror, and we see, oh, am I fat today or not? How did my hair look, or anything? What should I eat for lunch? You always care, like, right? It's we always we trying to take this pessimistic path that it's more that since if we don't have freedom, you're right. Like macro perspectively, you should not care, right? That's what the truth is telling you. You should not care. I think that's to me. I use it
Well,
as a
to be
way
more
that whenever,
precise, sorry, to
yeah,
be more precise, it's not my opinion that I should not care. It's simply that's not the case that I should care. I think there's a slight distinction, but continue, please.
absolutely, absolutely. The if the lack of free will implies that you should not care, does you should not care about a lot of things that's going on, and I'm always telling myself that, but you can only look at it backwards. For me, I always take the approach to talking about in a practical sense. I always take the approach that if I made a mistake, or if if I made a mistake or anything happened in the future and I'm extremely regret
Hmm.
about it, I'm telling myself that it's all determined, which it is. And in a sense, if we're acknowledging that there's a lack of free will, and I'm just telling myself there's nothing I can do otherwise, even though I think if I go back into that moment, I'll do it otherwise. But then there's not. It's just like a lot of people saying
Hmm.
that, oh, if I'm 20 and I buy this stock, I'll be billionaires. But then if you're 20, we go back, you still will not buy that stock. It's the same thing. That
Hmm.
if we just rewind time, if I'm back in that moment, I'm still not going to. I've still made that mistake. So then I'll tell myself that everything's determined, but it will not affect me. Still worry about, oh, next time I'll try not to do it, because I don't know what's going to happen next time, right? Like I can look at it in the back from like retrospectively, that like, oh,
Hmm.
it's already happened. I know, okay, I made this mistake today. I should not, like, why would this happen? But then and
Hmm.
then I'll let myself feel better in the sense that I'm telling myself everything's it's determined. But that doesn't affect me looking forward into the future and telling myself that, okay, next time I should not make that mistake, because
Right.
you can tell
I mean,
yourself, oh, let's don't care. In the future, let's just say whether I'll make that mistake or not, it's already determined. I should not care. I should not tell myself, let's not make it. But then in that moment of like, you think that you can like just live like carelessly, but in that moment, there's still like facts that's going to push you to caring about things more forward in the future, because it's also it's just like I said, another truth that's also respected in reality, that you will always, it's more of, it's whether it's a survival instinct, it's a utilitarian instinct to feel happiness, to feel pleasure, and all that, to keep living your life in a sense, then it's you're always going to care about different things, right? You're always
you
going to
know what
care.
you're saying. hmm
Yes.
I think what you're saying here, it really reminds me of a quite overused quote of Kierkegaard. He
Hmm.
said that life can
Yeah.
only be understood backwards, but must be lived forward. Uh,
Yeah.
I think it's a similar concept, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's a similar, definitely. I do, yeah. So I tend to be easier on myself, knowing that there's a lack of free
hmm
will, but that doesn't really affect me to being ambitious at different things, right? It doesn't really affect me to still care about different things, because really telling someone to give up, let's say a lot of people knows that, oh, I just don't care now. From this moment on, I don't have free will. I will not care about my life, because that's what the truth is telling me. And then the next day your boss calls
hmm
you still go to school, you still go to work, and then you'd be like, I don't have any money for lunch. You still do things as if you have free will, living forward, because you don't know what's going to happen, so you can still just living that moment, living that illusion. So that's how it's it's very counterintuitive, because it's more like two truths are pointing in different directions. Then
Right. You know
I
what
do think
troubles
that,
me?
yeah.
What troubles me is I think discussing this question of care seems
Hmm.
to me beyond the reach of philosophy, in particular beyond the reach of analytic philosophy, which concerns itself with rational arguments. It seems to me this is an issue that belongs to phenomenology of various strands. Personally, I'm a Sartrean when it comes to this issue.
Hmm.
And that is precisely because, like, I believe that number one, you can't really put this idea down onto paper. I think one of the schools of thought that you might initially or unintentionally appeal to is pragmatism and neo-pragmatism, to people like William James or Hans Reichenbach. But I think that pragmatism necessarily fails when it comes to this issue, because pragmatism is essentially based on the analysis of possibilities. Like, you could do A, you could do B. Doing A is better, so just do A, right? But like, free will undermines all of that, so you're no longer able to say anything pragmatic about your way of life. Like, you can live this way, but you can't recommend this way to
Hmm.
others or convince others to live like you. Um, so so it seems like this is a meta-philosophical problem rather than a philosophical one, in the sense that it forces us to switch our methodologies, which I think Kierkegaard
um
was almost on track to doing. But yeah.
yeah, I do think that, it's more of, so I don't think it really undermines the whole, the entire pragmatism train of thoughts. But then I think what William James and a lot of people argues can be compatible with this, or
Well,
their
well let,
methodology at least can be useful when we're still living in that illusion and we still need to make decisions, right? When we're saying that it's compatible,
hmm
that we still need to know like A is B, we still have to make the judgment that A is better than B, and you can still recommend it to people, because you still don't know what's going to happen in their life next too. So if we're putting this, to put it differently, the first truth, that determinism is true, and the second truth, that we're still responsible for our actions, and we will still, we still have, in in our life, in reality, in the moment, in the solution, we still have judgments to make of what's better and what's worse, and what we should do, what we should not do. Those arguments, when we're living this illusion, in this life, we can still apply all the William James, all those arguments to the second truth. But then that doesn't really contradict the first truth when we're saying that but at the same time, everything's decided. Right? At the same time, everything's decided, but you're still living in this moment in this solution. So you still have to make this moral judgments of what we should do, what we should not do, what's better and what's worth. So,
Well, to put it bluntly, to say that you
yes.
have to use this argument with an illusion, as an analytic person, for me, that is equivalent to saying, let's introduce a false premise into the argument and then follow its conclusion. To say that we have to launch an argument within an illusion is the same as to say that we should not launch an argument whatsoever, because to
Not,
launch an argument in an illusion is to assume a falsity. On the point of William James, let's talk about his pragmatism lectures, for instance. Not necessarily his pragmatism lectures. One interpretation of them, it says that, well, suppose there's no free will, but then we should still, believe that there is free will. Why should we do that? Well, because believing that there is free will lead us to a better life. But here you see that is introducing a premise that is frankly false, because there's no such thing as a better life. You live your life, I live my life. There's no better life to what we will live. So, your argument that we should do this within an illusion, for me, that's equivalent to saying, let's do this by assuming a false premise, which I don't think is a good
um,
practice.
I like I said, if we push it through the whole analysis, the whole analytical approach of this argument, the premise that it's an illusion it's entirely built to, because if what you're saying is that determinism is true, right? There's a lack of free will, then and you believe in determinism, there's no way that you can explain a lot of those counterintuitive phenomenons that's going on right now in reality, right? If you're looking at it, how can you, right? Like it's impossible to explain that there's a lack of free will, and then I'm telling, like, oh, why are people still doing that? Why are people still care? Why do people still, let's say, why do I think I still can raise my right hand, right? Why I still feel like I have control over what I'm saying, all the conscious things I'm doing. Why is that happening, right? It's impossible to put that theoretical idea to explaining the phenomenon of we still being able to still have that self-conscious, to put it in a Kantian way, still have the self-conscious to do
Right,
what we want
right.
to do, right? It's impossible. So that's why the idea of this is purely an illusion is introduced, right? Because when we're talking about, right, like the idea that, oh, how do you explain that phenomenon, was the theoretical idea that there's a lack of free will, then it has to be one of them, that either we don't have free will, right? Or that we can freely control those self-conscious, or that you believe that you can freely control it. It's an illusion to yourself. It's like it's counterintuitive in the sense that um it's not empirical. It's not how should I put it?
Well, I'm
It's
not
not,
sure about empirical, but
yeah, it's not that you can reach this idea by, like, only by simply feeling, because in that sense that it will always be counterintuitive. It will always be counterintuitive because
yeah,
you think that.
which is kind of my point. Like, what I'm trying to point out is that in investigating this fundamental problem of what do we do
Mhm.
when we have no free will, should we care about anything? I think that, pragmatism, number one, it is theoretical. Like, pragmatism is quite rigorous when you get to people like Reichenbach, who applies it to physics. Pragmatism has a lot of intellectual machinery within it, but all of that machinery is built on the assumption of free will. So what I'm saying is that by assuming, like, for the sake of argument, that we have no free will, that you can no longer theorize about it using the tools of pragmatism. All you can do is to approach it phenomenologically, that is, without using rational arguments. Because whenever you use rational arguments, the best we have is pragmatism, and pragmatism begs the question against free will. Yes, you can use the argument, but then you're just going to be contradicting what you started with. You're going to be contradicting the premise. And what phenomenology, for me at least, what Sartre was doing in Being and Nothingness, is he is challenging the very premise that we can know that we're not free. He is challenging the indifference problem not by solving the problem by some like clever pragmatism argument, but rather he is challenging the conceivability of the problem, and he's saying you can't really pose that problem. So that's kind of like my approach, and why I don't really favor the William James style responses, saying that you should not be indifferent because it'd be better if you're not. Yeah, that's kind of my response.
I don't favor his argument as well, in the sense that there's no a better or worse argument. In that sense, it's all the same life. In a way, it's all determined, and we should not make a valid judgment on a determined life, whether it's better or not. But then, I do think that it's at the same time that we have to make this distinction when we're talking about the compatibility between the theoretical the truth of there's a lack of free will, and the phenomenon that we are still self-conscious creature and thinking that we can think freely and we can will freely. So there's always that gap, right? There's always that gap that a lot of people
Yes.
reach the idea, oh, we do have a lack of free will, but then how do we explain this? How do we explain that we still feel this way, that we do possess free will, and we can determine, we can to some extent manipulate and determine stuff. So I think to cope with that gap, to really to make it not as a gap, is to understand this separately, right? Is to understand this separately in the sense that this does not affect, or that, or you can take two different approaches. You can reach that and then go back and be like, maybe we just don't have free will. Maybe we just have free will, right? The idea of the lack of free will, the thesis of determinism is wrong, right? Because we can think freely, and according to incompatibilist idea, right, the lack of free will, then if determinism thesis is wrong, then we have free will, right? Then we do have, implies an extent to some free will in the sense, right? Because so
Yeah.
if that's if
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah, if
Please
we're
continue.
reaching
Sorry.
that, yeah, if there's one approach to this, or another that is, if all the facts are telling you that theoretically there's a lack of free will, and then we reach that phenomenon conundrum that I somehow have my feelings, and I'm feeling that I can act freely, then you have to introduce a new idea of how you can make these two things coexist, and how you can explain that why we're having this two. And it's never a false premise. It's not a falsity to say that, to state that. Then what if that the idea that we can think freely and act freely, it's an illusion? It's not really the case, right? It's just saying that it's not really the case. Then it's another approach. Then you're going, and then you have to make sufficient argument to support that, how that we can think freely, but then in a sense we cannot, right? In the sense
Mm-hmm.
that it's purely an illusion, in the sense that the free is not really free. The free is what you think it's free. Look at it from above, it's not really free. But at the same time, since we think it's free, and we can never really jump above and know why is it not free, right? What are the different facts that's leading into it? Then in that sense, we still need to apply some kind of pragmatism arguments that there is a better, because we're still living in that moment, then we still have to apply some kind of argument of a better or worse, or what should happen and what should not with your actions, because you
Right.
can just never know.
Interesting.
So I think that's kind of a turn that's very counterintuitive and needs more exploration on how, like, this incompatibilist or this counterintuitive idea of, oh, there's a lack of free will, but then most of the determinists who reach that point and then look at it and be like, oh, then how do we explain this phenomenon? There's always more work to be done there, and more explorations on how those two ideas is compatible. I think that's a meaningful way that this discussion can lead to. Yeah,
Indeed. To not drag on the argument forever, I
absolutely.
will be uh
I
I would really want to actually like send you my paper, which actually talks about this from the
Oh yeah,
perspective of Sartre.
cool.
And I
Uh-huh.
think you'll enjoy it. I also talk about illusionism and its more contemporary counterpart. I don't know if you know, like fictionalism, representational prop, things like that.
Not,
Like
yeah, definitely not an
in
expert on it, but I would
metaphysics.
love to see.
Yeah, I actually think that this problem is solvable by, and also I draw from the Wittgensteinian idea of speakability. I think that you are right when you say that there's something unspeakable in this, and I think that this is part of the fundamental problem is that we can only speak about ourselves from an
Yes.
objective point of view, but we have to live from a subjective point of view. So I do think that you're on the right track when you cited Wittgenstein. But just before we
Yes,
end
yes.
this, I'd like to, I guess, talk about another issue, about the practical applications of your theory of moral
hmm
responsibility, particularly to prisoners. I wonder what's your reply to the now quite popular like C.S. Lewis Kantian objection that treating prisoners as mentally ill, mad people is somehow dehumanizing, and by saying you didn't choose to do this, you're kind of denying their humanity, and you're treating them as mere objects. What do you say against that? Like your way of treating prisoners is quite. You're not really respecting them as
I
agents. You're
mean,
only, you know.
yeah, yeah. Yes, definitely. I mean, to be honest, I do not even respect myself as agents, right? I do not respect myself as I
hmm
do view myself and everyone else, even if you're not a criminal, as fundamentally an object, right? Fundamentally
hmm
not capable of free will or not capable of freely choosing what you're doing. So if you ask me, I would say if even if I'm putting my if I have the same genetic inheritance as the criminal, right? If I'm
hmm
born in the same family, if I'm raised by the
Right.
same way, with all the environmental factors being the same, I will still do the exact same thing that the criminal will do at the moment. That's sort of my response to it. So then,
hmm
if that's the case, then I think if that's determined that that everything's made of objects, right? Everyone, it's a material. Everything's material. Everything's there's no such thing as free agent. So I'm not dehumanizing criminals in a sense. I'm dehumanizing everyone, right? There's no
uh,
such thing as agent in a sense. So then,
right.
um, yeah, but then that's the case. That's a necessary approach. I think that's what it necessarily leads to, the
hmm
deterministic idea. But then, I think
Right.
prisoners and but I do think that since we can still feel emotions, it's not like right, like in that moment, we're still living in that reality. We
hmm
still have, um, because indifferent is still an emotion, right? Like there's no, we can never experience kind of a complete lack of emotion, right? It's just you don't
Right.
care. It's still, it's very tricky there in a sense. But then, um, since that's the case, I do think that we should still be sympathetical to them, even though we were dehumanizing them in a sense, but we're dehumanizing everyone. We should be sympathetical to everyone, even yourself. We're just innocent being that we don't have the choice in the moment. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably
I
how I'll
guess.
respond to it. Sorry, but
I
I'm
guess if
running
you
a little bit short on
admit.
time.
Oh,
Yeah,
of course. Would you
yeah,
have
yeah,
another like three
uh,
minutes, like a
yeah,
pretty
yeah, for sure, for sure.
tangential point? So like
Uh-huh.
if you like admit to objectification, it's really practical. Like just imagine a future prison, like your type of prison, right? It would act like a quarantine. Right? Is that understanding correct? Like you'll act basically as a quarantine,
Yes, yes.
right? But how
If
long should the
yeah,
prisoner stay there? Does that is the length of the prison sentence based on the crime they did or based on whether they're safe for society? Because it seems to me that in your future prison, as long as they're like safe for society, they should be released. But that,
yes, no,
is that really fair? I guess. Like if
I
you
think
killed someone and I killed someone and I'm released sooner than you know, because I'm safer, is that really fair? I don't know. That seems like a practical issue, right?
yeah, it does. I do think it's very like utopian vision. It's more it's very impractical. It's just as impractical as communism in a sense. Anyway, but then
Uh,
in a sense, I do think that if we reach that day, if it's ever realized, I do agree with you that it's the only standard of judgment at that time is of how we should punish criminal. There's never such thing as let the crime fit the punishment, right? Because there's no there's
no
only
retributionism.
yeah, there's only because even there's different severity of the crime, but we should more judge if there are, let's say, rehabilitation programs in prison, and then we should really judge it by how safe they are coming back. I think again, this is what a lot of societies, a lot of countries are doing already, for at least a lot of them. I think especially criminals who have done very severe crimes, right? That are treated as mentally ill when they're rehabilitated in the sense that they're back to normal. A lot of them are released back to society, but there are still criminals, let's say, who are not serial killers but just killed or one person or did a robbery or raped someone. But then in that sense, a lot of them has to face even longer imprisonment that has to be released in a shorter time because maybe they've done something even worse in the prison. Maybe they're not remorseful for their actions. So I think that's it's already it's I wouldn't say it's not that impractical. It's still impractical, and I can see it.
Just a final point from Foucault. He'll say that in your prison, the punishment is not determined by public morality or even a jury or public consciousness. Rather, the prison sentence is determined by scientists and psychologists, and that for Foucault is like the most horrific prison possible. Foucault will tell you, well, that basically gives all the power to scientists, and that 1984 type situations will arise and stuff.
I do think Foucault's I do like Foucault. I really like Foucault in terms of his argument of normalcy and deviancy in the society. But then again, I only read his book on punishment. But then beside that, I do think that his resentment on the scientists and the psychologists at that time, it's a little bit backdated in a sense. This when we're arguing this in a sense, because he's taking more of a humane approach. I think he believes that it's crude because he thinks that when you analyze everything based on science and what the numbers tell you and all that, then you ignore a lot of humane parts. He had these ideas of abortion and all that. So I think at that time we're releasing, it's more inhuman to think that everyone's are sinners and you have sin within you. It's more like a Christian approach that it's more human to treat everyone as innocent, as fundamentally innocent, and having the chance to come back again instead of jury just to determine on someone's life, right? Having a single person or a group of people to determine it. The punishment, but rather let science lead the way of telling you whether it's capable of acting as a positive factor within the society. So yeah, that's how I'll put it. I think sure, Foucault will don't like the science part, but it's because of the science at his time and the goal that the science is serving for. But then I think he has he's a very humanitarian and person. So in a sense that there is a chance that he might endorse this argument as well. So yeah,
perhaps
see
what science delivers. Thank you very much for coming.
Absolutely,
and
absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, Henry.
Yeah, thank you, Max. Okay, so I'll start the recording right now.